Let's go ahead and get started here. So, for those who don't know, my name is Bryce Fiddler. I'm the director here at Carolina's Academic Leadership Network. We offer tools and professional development for our school board members working in North and South Carolina. And earlier I mentioned we're in deep summer. That also brings us to the start of the new fiscal year. And so, what that means for North and South Carolina is we have new budgets, or at least soon we will have a new budget for South Carolina. So, we're going to talk a little bit today about what's in these new budgets, particularly what some of our school board members should know. We'll talk about some of the increases to funding, some of the changes to teacher pay, but also some of the policy changes that have emanated from the new budgets. And for those that have joined us in the past, you'll know that some pretty substantial policy changes have been enacted through the budgets. And I think in the cases of both states, there's some interesting things to get into today. So, the way that we're going to structure it, just so you're all aware, is we're going to start with South Carolina. It's going to run for about 20 minutes. We'll take some questions at the end of that, and then I will turn things over to Caitlin Shepard of the John Locke Foundation to talk about North Carolina. So we've split them up accordingly. But if you want to tune in for one state or the other, feel free to do that. Okay, let's get started. So, what is in South Carolina's new budget? And to start, where is the budget, right? So, we started a new fiscal year in South Carolina starting on July 1st without a new budget. So, what that means for the state is we are temporarily operating at last year's funding through what's called a continuing resolution. Now, this is a fairly uncommon scenario. The last time this happened was during COVID when all of state government shut down and we could not pass a state budget. And so, outside of sort of extraordinary circumstances, usually they'll go maybe late into June, but it's pretty uncommon that we actually get into the new fiscal year without having a new budget. So functionally, what does that mean? Well, on paper, teacher raises and new funding are on hold until the budget is signed by the governor. But I'll put an asterisk next to that. I've talked with some school board members, and the chances are that your local situation may vary. Teachers, there's a little bit more nuance to what the pay schedules look like for that versus regular state employees. And finally, the timeline. The General Assembly is likely to return to Columbia in the next few weeks, but a date as of yesterday afternoon has not been set. So, what were some of the sticking points that the House and Senate were having trouble agreeing on? Well, basically, the House wanted to fund its full list of earmarks, and earmarks are legislator requested local projects. Think about your local opera house in your town, a bike path, a nature trail, renovations for things in your community. But what separates these from typical allocations is that these are requested by legislators. And increasingly over the last couple of years, they become a little bit more controversial. The public has requested some more transparency around who's requesting them for what purpose and how much. And I think the chambers have done a decent job of bringing more transparency to that. But there was some reservations about the amount of earmark funding. And so that was roughly $315 million for the House. The Senate wanted its own list of earmarks, but it wanted fewer of them and instead wanted to use some of that additional funding for increased property tax relief for seniors. Now, just as a quick note for our school board members in South Carolina, this doesn't necessarily impact things in your district directly because this tax benefit applies to seniors in their owner-occupied homes, which are already exempt from school operating taxes. So it will have some local implications, but as far as school funding goes directly, it won't present a major change. The conference committee reached a tentative agreement on the budget on July 22nd with pared down property tax relief and earmarks to be basically they kick the can down the road and they're planning to take those up separately at a. All right, so let's get into some of the top line figures. So the new budget aims to raise starting teacher pay from 48,500 to 50,500. That is significant because if you recall a few years ago, the governor set a goal of raising starting teacher pay over $50,000. I believe it was by 2026 or 2027. So with this latest budget, we are on track to meet that goal. It also increases each salary schedule cell by $2,000. So not only is this a increase for starting teachers, it's a raise for teachers at all of their levels of experience. As you'll know, districts often pay above the state minimums. So that's true for the dollar figures. For example, if your district has um, local funding options that it can use for these positions, it'll raise the teacher pay. It'll also extend the number of years that teachers can receive raises. The state minimum is 28 years, but many districts pay raises beyond that point. And finally, it allocates some funding for bus driver salary and fringe school funding increases. So the budget is late, right? So what happens now? Well, I'm going to qualify this slide to tell you that some of this information applies to employees working at state agencies. And earlier I said there's some flexibility around teachers. It's handled a little bit differently. But at a high level, after the budget is signed, state employee raises will be retroactive to July 1st. So that back pay amount that they're owed for those wages will be reflected on their first paychecks. And then going forward, future paychecks will reflect the general increase. I've spoken with a few school board members about what a delay could look like in their district. And what I understand is many teachers will see their raise in August as a standard. And it really depends on how your district has budgeted for this. Um, if this delay were to go for several months, I think it would put a little bit more strain. But likely what would be happening is some have basically used the extra funding resources that they have available to them to cover the minor delay in the state funding basically taking effect. And new teacher contracts typically begin in August anyway, so there's not too much disruption there. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other new spending. So there is $30 million in new funding for the purchase and lease of school buses. That is managed by the South Carolina Department of Education. I think South Carolina is somewhat unique in that most of the buses are managed by the state rather than local districts. There's also 75 million for renovation and construction of rural and charter school districts. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but what I tell you now is if you're curious about how to access some of that funding, I would await some additional guidance that we expect from the Department of Education in the coming weeks or perhaps months. And then finally, there is additional funding for the Education Scholarship Trust Fund. I think there's a typo there in my slides. That's the school choice program that South Carolina passed in 2025. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the policy changes that we are seeing in this new state budget, right? If you've been to a Callan training, anything talking about district finance, you've probably heard me say that provisos are meant to direct funding, right? So part A of the budget is sort of your line item appropriations by agency, and provisos go through and direct how some of that funding is to be spent. It sets sort of rules and guardrails. Provisos increasingly in the last few years, maybe even a decade, have been used to enact policy changes. And so we'll talk about some of those here today. All right, so this is a big one. If you don't take away anything else, and we hope you take away all of this, but I would encourage you to remember this new change. Let me make sure before I get to this, I want to make sure. All right, get this out of the way for everyone if it's not in your way. Perfect. So, what this does is it is capping the maximum amount that districts can pay for superintendent settlements, right? When the contract is dissolved and the district pays out a settlement to the superintendent, this new proviso sets a cap. So how does it work? What it says is that superintendent contracts entered into on or after July 1st, which we've already passed, must specify that a maximum settlement paid by the district in the event that the contract is dissolved will be no more than 1 year's salary or the remainder of the contract value, whichever is less, right? So this is a change that was first proposed earlier this year by Superintendent Ellen Weaver. It's something that's been advocated for by her office. There have been a lot of stories recently about some hefty sums that have been paid out by districts in settlements for their superintendents. And this has really caught the attention of state legislators and the Department of Education. So this is their response to what they've been seeing. And it's not all that dissimilar from the training law that was passed, which revises some of the training requirements for school board members, also taken up by the legislature this year. I think this speaks to the state is taking notice to some of the uh, examples of issues that have happened in local communities, and we're seeing an increase in action by the state government. And I think this is an example of that. All right, school safety grants. So if you were present on our recent school safety webinar, this is actually a program that we talked about. So the budget appropriated $20 million in new funding for school safety grants. And some of the eligible upgrades that districts can request are for door locks, window covers, bulletproof glass, and they've also added automated external defibrillators. It's a tough word for me today. And CPR training too. That's a new eligible expense. So this is a program that's been renewed every year for the last several years. Applications must be submitted to the Department of Education for requested funds by September 1st. So there's just over a month to do that. I don't believe the department has issued a memo on this yet, but I would expect to see something from their office to your districts in the coming weeks once the budget is finalized, telling you all the pertinent information about this program if your district is interested. Okay, earlier we talked about 75 million in capital funding for rural and charter schools, and this proviso elaborates on some of what that means. So it establishes a committee to review capital funding project requests for school infrastructure. And so some of the language has not yet been finalized on this, but as best we can tell, this has to be used for school buildings that are primarily used for K through 12 in-person classroom instruction, right? So not your district central offices. These are school buildings where instruction is happening. And the proviso seems to give weight to areas that are considered critical needs. So think areas that are in rural communities, areas that are considered high poverty. And as I mentioned, the proviso language has not yet been finalized. So we would encourage you to check back after the budget is passed. Okay, finally, not a major change, but I think kind of illustrates how some of the changes in the budget don't really have always have much to do with spending. So this authorizes your district-owned activity buses. So think about those buses that you take for school-sponsored trips on sort of long distances. It increases the allowable speed limit on highways up to 65 miles an hour. And again, this has to be to school-sponsored events that are more than 100 miles away. Okay. Some of you may know this, but state law actually caps the speed limit for school buses normally at 55 miles an hour. So this increases that limit for these particular circumstances. And finally, provisos they are in effect for 1 year and typically reauthorized. So what that means is if a proviso was added 5 years ago and it's been reauthorized every year in the budget, it remains in effect. And so that's true for the school cell phone ban, which was passed in 2024. That's true for the prohibition on CRT related instruction. I think the budget calls it partisanship instruction, but these are lessons that would teach students that one race is inherently superior or inferior, or that meritocracy is racist, sexist, or oppressive. So think about concepts that are typically associated with critical race theory. And then also after COVID, there was a ban enacted in the budget on school districts, prohibiting them from requiring students to wear face masks at school. So this is not an exhaustive list of all of the provisos. For that, you'd have to go and look at Section 1B of the budget language once it's passed and finalized in the next few weeks. But this is some of the recent significant provisos that are still in effect. Okay, so that'll conclude my presentation for South Carolina. Before we turn it over to Caitlin for North Carolina, I wanted to see if anyone has any questions. Got a very active bunch here today. All right. All righty. Well, thank you so much for that. If you have any questions that come to mind through the rest of the webinar, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll leave some time at the end of the presentation. And with that, Caitlin, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Bryce. And I think Kayla is going to pull up some of my slides here in just a minute. So I'll give her just a second to do that.
And that's a good time. And Victor, thank you for your clarification on the secondary impact. You say that local municipalities will begin looking at other options like FILOs, MCIPs, and TIF to make up the revenue loss. That's true. I mean, from a holistic local perspective, there is an impact because all of the money, when you reduce, one stream of funding, local governments will inevitably be looking for other funding streams. So I appreciate the context there.
All right, well, it looks like Kayla's got my slides, so we'll just go ahead and jump right into it here. Like Bryce mentioned, my name is Caitlin Shepard. I'm the Education Policy Analyst with the John Locke Foundation Center for Education. I'm going to be covering today not only some spending highlights, but also some policy highlights that were included in the new North Carolina state budget. Just by way of introduction, North Carolina kind of gained a little notoriety on the budget last year for being the only state not to pass a statewide budget. And so I think there was a lot of anticipation around the budget this year. And so finally, this was signed into law by Governor Stein earlier this month on July the 7th. So lots of spending highlights, lots of policy highlights. So we'll just go and jump into it. You can go to the next slide, Kayla. I think we want to go back one if you can.
Are you guys
Kayla,
seeing the slides changing?
can we
Yeah,
get that
now
in full screen?
Yeah,
Is
it
that an
it
option?
was, but it's hold on. This one, right?
I see that, yeah, the one that has the school building on it and it says education
Okay.
spending and pay raises.
I don't know if it's delayed, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, if it doesn't work, we'll just make do. So, um, the first thing I wanted to talk about was just general education spending. So the total budget for North Carolina this year going to be $34.4 billion. Of that amount, more than a third or 12.5 billion is going to be set aside for K-12 public schools. So definitely a lot of spending there going towards education. Important to know on that topic that there will be 598.1 million set aside for pay raises for teachers. The budget also raises starting teacher pay from 41,000 up to $48,000. That's just the starting pay, not including the local supplements. And it will give teachers an 8% raise on average. That was effective July the 1st. In addition to pay raises, teachers are also eligible for bonuses based on their years of experience. So, teachers with starting out up to 15 years of experience are will receive $500 bonus, and for teachers with 16 or more years of experience, the bonus will be $1,000. I think the date for that is still uncertain, but I think I've read that they're not later than October is when those bonuses will be awarded. Um, if the next slide is working, you can go ahead and go to the next one, Kayla.
It says pay raises continued on my with the little pig on it.
Yeah, I don't see it, but I can just go ahead and
Okay, that's so odd.
so
We
sorry for
might have to come out of full screen. I don't know if that would be easier.
Alrighty, well we can go without it too if that works. Um,
Okay.
I also wanted to talk about, in addition to teacher raises, I also wanted to cover some information about pay raises for other educational employees. So first up, we have principals are going to be receiving about, on average, a 3% salary increase, and principals also eligible for a bonus this year based on how much money they earn. So principals making less than 65,000 a year will receive a $1,750 bonus, and for those making above 65,000, the bonus will be $1,000. So for principals there. For central office and non-certified staff, also going to be seeing a 3% raise and the same bonuses based on the earned income there. Assistant principals, the salary increase on average this year is 6.3%. For school nutritional workers and custodial staff, we'll be seeing a $1,750 bonus this year. That funding is coming from savings identified by the state as a result of students using the Opportunity Scholarship funding. You may know the Opportunity Scholarship is a school choice program that we have here in North Carolina, open to students throughout the state. And if the student is accepted for this scholarship, parents can direct a portion of spending towards private school tuition and fees, and the amounts are based on family income. So families at the first income tier receive the first priority in scholarship awards as well as a higher amount. And families at the higher end of the income tiers receive a lower amount. And as a result, when students use this program, oftentimes the amount that the state sets aside for education is less than if that student were to attend public school, their assigned base school. And so the savings that have been identified for students that use the program to switch from public to private schools are going to be allocated towards these bonuses for school nutrition workers and custodial staff. Again, that's bonus is $1,750. Um, and again, the date for the bonuses is a bit uncertain, but the pay raises effective July 1st, and I'm hearing that we can expect the bonuses by the end of September for most other educational employees. So that's the main spending highlights that I wanted to highlight today. I also wanted to talk about a couple of important studies that were included with the budget this year. The first one of these being a study on open enrollment. So according to the budget, the UNC Collaboratory, which is a research organization over at UNC, will be studying how school districts can allow students to attend any school within their assigned district rather than their base school. So this is a type of school choice that's commonly known as open enrollment. Basically just gives families more options within the traditional public school system. Many states around the country have used this. And so depending on the policy, in the state, parents can choose any school within their assigned district or sometimes even in a neighboring district. Here, we're just looking at the form that is within the district. And so under the budget, the UNC Collaboratory would be looking at how many districts are already doing this throughout North Carolina. There are some that have chosen to adopt this policy within their own district. Union County is one of those, Pitt County is another. So the budget will direct the study to look at the districts that are already implementing this, as well as to consider important elements if that were to be adopted statewide, such as how many application periods there will be in a year, what kind of transportation options will be available, if any, how capacity will be addressed, communicated to parents, other considerations that will be important to implementing this statewide. So there won't be a policy change now, but does indicate some interest by lawmakers in this form of school choice and looking at how it can be implemented in North Carolina. The second study I wanted to highlight for you today is a study on weighted student-based funding. Under the budget, $300,000 is going to be allocated for the UNC Collaboratory to study convene a working group of experts on public education finance in North Carolina to study student-based funding and recommend a strategy for North Carolina to transition towards this way of funding schools. Currently, North Carolina uses a very complicated resource-based model. You can kind of think of this as buckets of money or formulas for different aspects that the state believes is important for providing an education. Things like salaries, transportation, cafeteria needs, books and technology, things like that. That different formulas determine how much money a school gets for all these different categories. I believe there's more than 50 of these different formulas in North Carolina, so a very complicated way of financing education. But most other states have done some sort of form of this student-based funding, which is different in that each student in the state generates a base amount of funding. And then they are eligible for additional funding that is a percentage of the base amount based on their unique needs. So In many states, this is things like coming from a low-income household, attending a small or sparsely populated district, having special needs, or participating in career technical education tracks. So kind of a wide variety of things, but that generate additional funding to help that student get the education that they need based on their unique needs. And so the advantages of this system are that it's more flexible with school officers to decide how the money is spent at the local level. It's much easier to understand where the money is coming from and how it's being used, so more transparency. Along with that, some accountability. When it's easier for members of the public and school officials to understand where the money's going, it's easier to ensure that the um, money is achieving the desired results that we want to see for students in our state. So a lot of advantages in other states that we've seen from this student-based funding. So again, another effort to study this in North Carolina and look at how North Carolina could transition to kind of this method of funding schools. So we can go to the next slide, Kayla, if you can. And then to wrap up, I just wanted to talk about a few other policies that I thought would be of interest and important to know at. The first one is the budget does allocate funding for implementing the federal tax credit scholarship program in North Carolina. This is a program at the federal level that states have to opt into, and North Carolina is among those states that has chosen to opt into that. So the budget would give $1 million, I believe, in funding to help administer this program that's going to be starting at January of next year. And how it works is that individual taxpayers can donate to a scholarship granting organization, which then can provide a scholarship to benefit students in the state. And in return, the taxpayer can receive a dollar for dollar tax credit on their federal taxes of up to $1,700. And so there's been a lot said about how this program benefits students that are attending private schools, but I do think it's important to know that it can also benefit students who are attending charter schools and public schools as well. The funding can be used for qualified elementary and secondary education expenses. So for the public schools, this will look like things like fees, tutoring costs, transportation expenses, computer technology, books and supplies, services for students with disabilities, and even things like extended day or summer programming could be a way that this funding could be used. So definitely important to note this funding can benefit students attending our traditional district and charter schools as well. So something to be aware of there. Second, new state standards on artificial intelligence literacy. These will be implemented with the 28-29 school year. So standards you can kind of think
Yep.
of those as a framework of what students should know and be able to do after they've completed a certain grade level or course. And these are set by the state, they're reviewed periodically. And then districts are able to choose the specific curricula that they use to implement the standards. And so here, the state is going to be adopting standards on artificial literacy or artificial intelligence literacy. So this will include things, it'll be for K-12, and it'll include things such as how to use AI responsibly and ethically, the limitations of artificial intelligence tools, how to verify the information that you get out of AI, as well as privacy, how to protect your privacy and data online when using AI, and then best practices when interacting with chatbots. So these will be some of the things that the State Board of Education will be talking about with these standards. Additionally, the Department of Public Instruction will be developing a model policy, and districts will be required to implement a policy. They don't have to use DPI's policy, but it gives them something to go off of in terms of an AI policy for their individual districts. And this will include things like defining AI, specifying how it can be used within the district, including within existing academic integrity policies, guidance on how to use it, and protecting privacy and security. So something to be aware of, I think, for districts throughout the state coming on artificial intelligence. Third, we have some early math interventions that were included in the budget. Um, Specifically, there will be a minimum requirement of at least 60 minutes of daily math instruction for grades K-8 in low-performing public schools. And there will be required of universal math screeners in K-8 to kind of identify students that are behind in these low-performing schools, as well as the requirement to have a math improvement policy for students that are identified in these screeners as being behind on math. So there will be some funding set aside for that, 6 million for the math screeners, 5 million for adopting high quality instructional materials, and 10 million for teacher professional development. So definitely an effort there from the state to help students achieve math proficiency. Some literacy funding was included in the budget. There's 13.8 million for professional development for middle school educators and expanding screening assessments for students that are in grades 4 and 5. So North Carolina has already done a lot to encourage literacy and the science of reading in early grades, K through 3. So an effort here to expand that, catch students that are needing help on literacy and catch them up there. And finally, some provisions on teacher licensing flexibility, an effort here to ease licensure requirements for teachers that are coming from out of state and internationally. Essentially, would just let the state board convert a limited license into a continuing professional license for demonstrated high performance, dropping certain licensure exams, and then expanding existing K-6 licenses to apply to other grades. So just an effort here to ease licensure requirements, ensure that qualified teachers are able to come teach in North Carolina. So that's all I have, but happy to try and answer any questions if there are any.
All righty, thank you, Caitlin, so much. Thank you so much for that, Caitlin. Do we have any questions on North Carolina's budget?
I do. Do you see any, Mike Kubinik here, do you see any specific items in the budget that are going to directly require policy changes?
I believe the one that we talked about earlier with the artificial intelligence policy will be a policy change. Not other ones are coming to my mind, but I'd be happy to look into it and get back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Mike, I'll add one in here that's I don't think will directly result in a policy change. It's more of an opportunity for districts. So this is a smaller program, but it's launching a student school attendance pilot. It's about $75,000 for districts that are struggling with students with chronic absenteeism. And so this will be available to a single district. Well, any district can apply, but participation will be limited to one district, and they can apply through DPI through the next month or so, I believe, if they want to basically pilot this program, see if it's effective, and then the state might return later to introduce some more money and expand it out to others.
So as far as this like literacy funding, for example, how does this money, these different areas of how do they actually impact individual counties and schools? And so I'm wondering how much this literacy funding money will end up coming to, say, Burke County, and then what's Burke County going to do with that? I guess I need to ask my superintendent what he's going to do with the literacy money that's coming to the county.
That's a great point, Brad. It might be useful to ask your superintendent for a list of all of the new money, either guaranteed and opportunities that are going to be available to the district as part of the new budget. It's a 600 plus page document. There are certainly some things in the budget that have probably slipped by us, including people that are reporting on some of the news. The best place to go would be to speak with your superintendent to get some sort of report or update on all of the additional funding, and then obligations and requirements for districts.
Yeah, yeah, I will do that. Yeah.
Um, Cheryl asked, does the state require AI use or just teaching about safety and how to use and determine AI materials? So this is not about requiring districts to use AI. This is about raising literacy for students about AI. So think about ethics and privacy. You don't want to be putting personal identifiable information in there, fact checking your information. You don't just want to single-handedly rely on what ChatGPT tells you. You should, check your sources, that sort of thing. So this is about increasing awareness about some of the downsides and the benefits, I presume, of AI. A few months back, we did have a webinar encouraging, to the extent that you have the time and that you can, every district to have at least a boilerplate policy on AI. And the reason for that is because students are already using it in your district, whether or not you have one. Teachers are already using it for things like grading and lesson plans. And so our call to action for districts was it's in your interest now to set some guardrails and some parameters on how AI is to be used, that it's not going to supplant and replace education, that it's going to have an academic benefit. And so if you'd like some of the resources that we talked about in that webinar, we'd be happy to send those out to everyone.
That would be great. Thank you. I think there's a lot of confusion in amongst our board and staff because some were stating that it was a requirement by the state. And I thought that the requirement by the state was only to learn about it, not to actually use it for lesson plans.
So I'll put it here in the chat so you can see exactly what it's going to require here. This is directly from the budget about what some of the new standards will entail: ethical use of AI, limitations of AI tools, verifying outputs, privacy concerns, all things that I just sort of summarized here.
Awesome.
I think the truth is most districts don't have a specific policy on AI. There might be some overlap with their broader policies on device usage. And we're seeing that as districts are rethinking one-to-one access, does every kid need a Chromebook? Conversations about AI are being paired with that. But earlier this year, South Carolina's biggest, or one of the biggest school districts, Greenville, passed its first AI policy. I know Charlotte Mecklenburg passed one. Cheryl, your district in Wake might have an AI policy, but when we sampled a lot of districts, most did not, and we're just really getting around to taking this up.
Yeah, we
I
were
think
in the middle of developing our policy, and that's where the conversation went.
Got it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All righty, y'all. Well, if there's no more questions here, we can go ahead and break a little bit early.